And then we wait for LinkedIn.
This is the part where we talk about our kids refusing to eat normal food and then also refusing to eat peanut butter.
Yeah. Every kid loves a peanut butter sandwich except mine when it's the exact thing that she asked for.
Well,
Right.
yeah, you're never going to want what you asked for. That's just
Never.
kid
Not
food
when you're 5.
101.
All right. LinkedIn is catching up to us. We are live on LinkedIn.
Perfect.
So hello and welcome back to another episode of Lunchable Go-to-Market Ops. We're your hosts, Danielle Urban and
Sarah Lane-Hawn.
Serving up grab-and-go HubSpot strategy every weekday in 15 minutes or less. And in today's episode, we are talking about how to audit your lead score, because we talked yesterday about all the ways that you should be using it and maybe aren't, and some common issues that we see with lead scores. So if you are now taking the dive to improve it, as you should be, this is your starting point. Like, take inventory, see what's there. So we touched on this a little bit yesterday because I had mentioned my document and the one that we probably both created independent of each other that looks exactly the
Yes.
same. We haven't compared yet. We should.
We should.
But that spreadsheet is my audit. Like, that is my living, breathing audit document because I include a column of the date that we set something live. So yeah, let's just dive in a little deeper today.
Yeah, no, and I love that idea of starting with it from the categories, right? Because that's the purpose of kind of us having built things in a spreadsheet, is just kind of keep those categories top of mind so that when you are either auditing or building new a lead scoring rubric, you're not forgetting basic things, right? So I think you had mentioned some specific behavioral categories that you have to monitor. From a demographic perspective, a lot of the things that I do have to do with both company fit and title. And I just typically put those in one unless somebody is doing more advanced company scoring and contact scoring. But for companies or for contact scores anyway, I'll still have that their company is in a specific industry or that it has a specific amount of revenue if that's important to the client. I also have clients who have specific target lists and they've already addressed the entire target market and know like this is our
Like
ideal.
an ABM named
And so
account.
if those are already in their system, we go ahead and are just like, whoop, we already flagged these people. For sure, that's going to be a category of interest. And then, of course, titles are another big piece. Now, everybody does titles a little bit differently. The way that my structure has kind of evolved over the years has been to include a seniority point and then a department set of
I like
points.
that.
And so basically in the seniority point, you'll have how do you rank student, intern, manager, VP, and C-suite, right? And so you basically say, here are the different title levels, all of their variations of how they could show up, right, in a title field. And here's where we want to add or subtract points depending on where those people are in the org chart. And then from the department perspective, it's going to be the keywords in their title. So if you really have a product geared towards the VP of customer success, client success, CSM, those org level, department level, are going to be the part of the title that I care a lot about. And since that's my target, I still, though, am going to probably want to talk to a manager of CS before I necessarily want to talk to like the CFO, right? Like depending on my focus, just having the seniority, it doesn't necessarily make you the best person for me to talk to. So that's what I've found to be useful is break up the seniority from the department because lead scores, as we know, are additive in nature. So if they have both the title that you're looking for and they're in the right department, then woo, you got major points. But then you have kind of a play between those of maybe they're lower seniority, but they have the right title of the right department, or maybe it's the wrong department, but they have a really high title. So like, sure, we'll talk to you. Anything else on the demographic score from your perspective If not, would love to hear your behavioral score kind of chunks.
Yeah, no, I think I, in a lot of cases, because I work in B2B SaaS, end up doing a separate company score. But I agree with you. Like, if it's pretty set in stone, then there isn't really a reason to break it out. Even one of my clients, their company fit score is based on a single, data source. So it's really very straightforward for them. And then we're talking about ways to sort of break that out and add some more attributes into that score. But even then, we're talking about data quality. So when you get into things like industry, how much do you really trust whatever source you're using to push it in? HubSpot has their company insights, which can be really helpful, but we know that, especially in some corners of business, those are not very accurate. And so I always kind of say, like, well, we can put that in there, but we shouldn't weight it very highly. And so I like that call out. And I think the other thing in titles that I've come up with recently, and I posted about this on LinkedIn, there was some really good discussion on it, not good discussion, but funny discussion, was the combinations of letters that can exist in other titles. And so when you talk about breaking out level versus category or level versus department, you get things like, what was it? Director has IT in it or something? No, director doesn't, but there was some
but
other.
I know what you're talking about, that the combination of letters for like CEO might be in another word. And so even though it's not standalone, it could potentially get flagged if it's not formatted correctly.
Yes. And so the workarounds for that got really creative. Shout out to Spructier for helping me out there. I had a couple really awesome contacts jump in and help me out how to troubleshoot things, because in the old scoring app, you can do matches exactly. In the new scoring app, you can only do contains. And so, or like contains exactly versus contains. When you have contains, that means it will like find letters within words. When you have contains exactly, it will match that entire phrase within, or like that entire word inside of a phrase, but not within a word. So very important thing to look for. But I think that ties back to our whole theme today of like auditing. You need to go back and look to see if that's happening. So when you look at your, high scoring, and maybe even you should copy over your static scores when somebody like becomes an opportunity, so that you can assess what score levels are closing. Because again, the behavioral scores will go up and down based on what they're doing at different points in time, or depreciating that value over time. So if you can copy over some of that, the contact and company fit should be fairly static. So you can kind of assess against that. And that's usually what we're looking for in opportunity close. But when you start to look at the spread of scores for opportunities created versus opportunities closed, then that's where you might start to see some things like, okay, well, if opportunities aren't even getting created in this high range, why? And is it because you're surfacing IT inside of another word? And that's where you'll catch that. So pivoting back to behavioral activities, this is where you have to be very honest with yourself. And I think we touched on this a little bit yesterday, where like the person who's creating the score cannot let their bias influence what's happening. And I gave the example of someone who said, well, what about the events that we spend a lot of money on? We should score those higher. And I was like, no, you should not. You should figure out what the engagement is at those events. And so that's where I think you can start to break it down into your different sources that are coming in. So you have like web activity, where if they're visiting pages, some of those pages might be more important than others, like pricing or contact us. But even still, web activity is just clicking around. Like it's not all that indicative of behavior. It's easy to capture, which is nice, but not a great model to build off of. And so then you have form interactions, which you could roll up into web activity. But because it's very clearly a person taking an action intentionally, then, score that higher or score that slightly differently based on the way that your content maps to your pipeline. And then when you look at all of your other sources, you might have different types of events. You could attend a conference versus hosting a meetup versus hosting a, private VIP baseball suite, which I got to go to one time in New York. So those kinds of things are obviously going to serve different value to both you as a company and the way that you get to interact with people, and the way that, the person perceives you, the lead perceives you. If you're inviting them to a VIP catered suite in Yankee Stadium, then, and they're going to show up for that. They probably want your free food, but they're already on a pre-vetted list. So the like VIP, event hosting should be scored pretty highly because they've been vetted. They showed up. They probably had some conversation beyond that.
And it's a personal interaction. So, there's going to be something of value there that's been given and received.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Versus the combination of conference activities, like maybe you scan a badge because you have a giveaway. Like, please don't give that too many points just because they were there.
Yeah, please don't. And take me off of all of the lists, please.
Yes. I just want your free thing.
I went and got swag for my kid. So I think the other thing when we're talking about auditing, one of the last things that I actually do after I've built that rubric out in an Excel spreadsheet is I just start testing scenarios, right? So let's say I typically build it off of a pretty low number, just my personal preference, right?
Mm-hmm.
Less math to do. So typically MQL is like somewhere around like the 15 mark. Like it's like I use tiny.
Are you giving like 1 and 2 points to things?
Somewhere between 1 and 10 usually.
Okay.
And so once I establish whatever that threshold is though, right? I don't care if you do it 100, 15, whatever. Then go back through, and you can do this easier in an Excel spreadsheet, like just visually to scan it and say, okay, let's say I know something in each category, right? Something in each behavioral category, something in each demographic category. Like, what are the different ways? What's the minimum that I need to know about somebody in order for them to qualify? And is that enough? Is it too much? Demographic score. This is really important because a lot of times people will set the threshold and then you realize that like next to no one's going to meet that threshold because it's hinging on everybody, knowing 4 or 5 things about everyone.
Right.
When actually the majority of your database, before they're into a sales conversation, you only know 3 things about.
Right.
And so if that's the case, you need to bring the threshold down to mirror what's actually reasonably going to be in the database at the time that you want people to progress. So that's a thing I think that people miss frequently just because you've spent so much time developing the score, figuring out what's measurable, associating values, right? You did all of this work, you figured out what the threshold should be, and then you want to just implement it and run. And the truth is that last step of going, okay, wait a minute, let's QA it. What are the different ways people can get there? Is that actually going to happen frequently?
Right.
Or are we hinging this score on something that like 5% of the time we can capture and 95% of our database, like we'll never know if they did this action or if they met this criteria. So that one I think is really important.
I have 2 thoughts on that. One, the new lead scoring app has some like visualizations built in. I think it's only once you publish the score. So you have to like implement it and let it churn through. But then you get this little bar chart of the different bands of values that you have in your database. And so you can adjust those thresholds to see like what's mid-range versus high range versus low range. And it gives you that visual. So helpful in understanding if you're capturing those kinds of things. Like if you only have 3 out of 4 and you have your lead score set to need all 4, you're going to see that like everybody's low and no one's hitting your thresholds. Super helpful for getting into that. And then I forgot the other thing I was going to say.
But it was really important and helpful.
That was great. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is when you're building new lead scores or making changes to an existing score, build a different score. We talked about this near the end yesterday, but if you are building and testing, especially in the old lead scoring app, pro accounts get 5 scores across all objects. I think it's 5. And each of those can have up to 100 attributes. When you get into an enterprise portal, then I'm pretty sure you get like 20 or 25 scores. You can really go nuts. But even those 5 scores are usually enough because if you're basing your model and your progression through stages on those 3 scores max, maybe it's just 2, then you've got some headroom to play with things. And so if you keep one of those score slots as your test, then you can see what's going to happen and understand what the downstream impact of making that change is, and see how many people get that score distribution. without actually impacting anything that's already built, because you might accidentally MQL 35,000 people and push them through and upgrade them and then have to roll that back. So don't do that. Build yourself a test score, build out all of your attributes, and then you can either take that one live, like switch over your workflows to reference the new one, or go back and make those changes in your existing score so that it's consistent.
Love it. I feel like we hit on about everything that we could in 15 minutes.
Yes.
Tomorrow we're going to talk about the lead scoring strategy and really like how to approach this, not just from a tactical level, in the actual lead scoring model, but from a business alignment perspective. And so I'm really excited about that conversation, because I think I said yesterday, like, this is one of the key tools that I use to actually align sales and marketing leaders. So this is great. So we'll talk about that tomorrow, and then we've got more coming too. But I'd say if anybody also has questions about lead scoring, things that you've run into, things that you're not sure about how to strategically approach, like, let us know, because the week's not done yet, and we can pivot and talk about other things. So.
Yeah, we're here to help.
Awesome.
All right, we'll see everyone tomorrow.
Bye.